This lesson examines death and human grief through both ancient and modern perspectives. It centers on the story of Siddhartha Gautama teaching Kisa Gotami that loss is universal, as shown in the sermon at Benares, which advocates peace through the release of selfish attachment. In contrast, modern essays explore the emotional stages of grief, stressing that there is no single right way to mourn, and that anger and pain are natural responses. Reflective activities and poetry further prompt students to distinguish between loving outward traits and the inner self. Together, the texts offer a broad understanding of how people across time have sought meaning and comfort in the face of mortality. Sometimes the most profound wisdom grows out of the deepest and darkest waters. Look at the single glowing lotus floating on the surface here, illuminated against the shadowy stupas in the background. This contrast perfectly captures the essence of our story. A mother's overwhelming grief becoming the soil for a blooming, enlightened understanding of life. We are not just reading a sad tale. We are witnessing a journey from personal darkness to spiritual light. As we begin, keep this image in mind, for it represents the calm acceptance that awaits at the end of a very storm-tossed journey. We enter the story at a moment of absolute blinding denial. Focus on the sketch of the mother, her shoulders slumped under the unbearable weight of the child she refuses to let go of. She is physically carrying her grief from door to door, asking for medicine for a problem that medicine cannot fix. This isn't just sadness, it is a desperate mission where her love has completely clouded her senses. Recognizing this state of shock is crucial, because she is currently unable to accept the reality that the boy is dead. When we are at rock bottom, we often look for a miracle cure rather than the truth. Notice the shift in the dialogue here, where a neighbor stops offering useless medicine and instead points her toward a physician of a different kind. The man directs her to Sakyamuni the Buddha, offering the first real ray of hope she has felt. This moment is the pivot point where her journey changes from seeking a physical cure to seeking a spiritual guide. It reminds us that sometimes the best help a community can give is simply pointing us in the right direction. Before he was a wise teacher, the Buddha was a prince who lived in a bubble, shielded from all pain. Follow the progression of these 4 panels, moving from the shock of the sick man and the aged man to the stillness of the monk. These 4 sights shattered his royal life, proving that suffering isn't an accident but an inevitable part of existence. He left his palace specifically to understand these sorrows, which explains why he won't just use magic to fix Kisa's problem. He knows that simply bringing the boy back wouldn't solve the real problem of human suffering. Sometimes a teacher sets a task that seems easy on the surface, but is actually a psychological trap. Look closely at the specific condition attached to this request for a handful of mustard seeds. The Buddha agrees to help, but demands the seed come from a house where no one has lost a child, husband, parent, or friend. He is not sending her to find a cure for her son. He is sending her to discover the prevalence of death. This condition is the key that will eventually unlock her understanding of the world. Hope can be blinding, making us miss the fine print of the instructions we've been given. Observe Kisa's eager posture in the artwork as she moves between the open doors, believing the cure is just a handout away. She is filled with joy, thinking the hard part is over, when in reality the true lesson hasn't even begun. The neighbors are kind and pity her, offering the seed immediately, but she is about to hit the wall of the Buddha's condition. This creates a moment of dramatic irony where we know she is destined to fail, but she is still running on pure optimism. The most painful questions often receive the most universal answers. Focus on the crucial question Kisa asks at every threshold. Did a son or daughter die in your family? With every yes she receives, the initial offer of help turns into a shared confession of sorrow. She is finding that while the specific details of loss differ, the presence of death is constant in every single home. Her personal tragedy is slowly being diluted into the realization that the living are few, but the dead are many. A quiet moment on a dark roadside can sometimes illuminate more than a busy day of searching. Watch how Kisa sits alone in the bottom left, observing the city lights flickering against the darkness of the valley. She realizes her son's life was just like those lamps, flickering up briefly and then being extinguished. This visual metaphor is the turning point where she stops being a desperate mother and starts becoming a wise observer of shared fate. It is here that she understands that death is common to all, and her selfishness melts away into acceptance. Grief is not a straight line. It is a winding staircase from denial to wisdom. Trace the path on this map, starting from the heavy black teardrop of denial and moving down to the blooming lotus of peace. We have watched Kisa move from overwhelming grief in stage 1 through the desperate hope of the task, all the way to the personal epiphany of the city lights. This visual structure helps us see that her journey wasn't random. It was a necessary progression to reach the final stage of acceptance and peace. It reminds us that wisdom is a destination we have to walk toward, step by painful step. We often live as if we are permanent, but nature tells a very different story. Look closely at the ripe mango hanging from the branch and the cracked clay pot sitting below it. The Buddha uses these everyday objects to explain a terrifying truth. Just as the fruit is destined to fall and the pot is destined to break, human beings are bound by nature to die. It is not a punishment or an accident, but simply the unavoidable condition of being made of mortal clay. Understanding these metaphors is key to seeing death not as a thief, but as a natural law. There is a natural instinct to cry when we are hurting, but this slide challenges us to rethink that reaction. Notice how the heavy chains are wrapped around the grieving figure, tightening with every tear shed. The Buddha teaches that while sadness is real, the act of endless weeping does not bring peace. Instead, it physically sickens the body and traps the mind in greater pain. The chains illustrate that uncontrolled lamentation imprisons the living without doing anything to save the dead. This is a hard lesson in emotional discipline, suggesting that composure is stronger than despair. Healing is not a passive process. It requires you to perform surgery on your own soul. Focus on the hands in the artwork, actively pulling the arrow labeled grief out of the heart. Peace does not just arrive. It is obtained only by the person who has drawn out the arrow of complaint and lamentation. The visual emphasizes that you must take agency over your emotions to become composed again. This distinction between feeling pain and removing the arrow of suffering is the secret to finding the blessing of peace. Reading ancient texts can sometimes feel like cracking a secret code, but the keys to understanding are right here. Scan the table on the left to see how words like repaired or kinsman translate into our modern speech. When the text says Kisa repaired to the Buddha, it doesn't mean she was fixed. It's an old way of saying she went to him. Also, notice the grammar insight at the bottom regarding the semicolon. It serves as a bridge connecting related thoughts into one flowing rhythm. Mastering these terms ensures you don't get tripped up by vocabulary when trying to grasp the deeper philosophy. Great stories don't just provide answers. They force us to ask difficult questions about ourselves. Look at the central card featuring the heart and the question about selfishness. Kisa Gotami accuses herself of being selfish, but we must ask, is a mother's desperate love for her child truly a flaw or just being human? Then consider the card on the right. Why did the Buddha use a mustard seed task instead of just giving a lecture? Engaging with these questions transforms you from a passive reader into a critical thinker. You might understand the story emotionally, but this slide shows you how to prove it academically on an exam. Focus on the highlighted term experiential learning in the introduction block. This is the precise vocabulary that elevates your answer. It explains that the Buddha's method wasn't about lecturing, but about forcing Kisa to confront the universality of loss firsthand through a specific task. By structuring your response from the specific task to the city lights epiphany, you demonstrate exactly how her perspective shifted from my grief to our grief. Following this model ensures you capture the full arc of her transformation. 2,500 years later, we are still trying to figure out the best way to handle a broken heart. Compare the lotus icon on the left, representing the Buddha's path of acceptance, with the gears of modern psychology in the center. While modern science often focuses on processing emotions through stages like anger and denial, the Buddha pointed directly toward accepting reality as the ultimate cure. Then look at the handshake on the right. Some thinkers, like Amitai Etzioni, suggest the answer lies simply in what we can do for one another. This comparison highlights that while our methods change, the human need for solace remains universal. You cannot have a valley without a mountain, and this philosophy suggests you cannot have joy without sorrow. Look at the gold filling the cracks of the kintsugi bowl, making the broken parts the most beautiful element of the vessel. Khalil Gibran argues that the cup holding your grief is the very same one that holds your happiness. The deeper the sorrow carves into you, the more joy you can eventually contain. It challenges us to see our pain not as a defect, but as the necessary counterpart to our capacity for love. If this lesson helped you, please like and share it with others who may benefit. Subscribe to Pragnya Education for more clear, concept-driven learning. Keep learning, keep growing with wisdom.